There was a mild chill in the late afternoon air as I climbed the short flight of steps leading up to her front porch. In a last sliver of September sunshine, the polished brass door knocker caught the light, glinting ominously. I could see, through the glass panel, my mother-in-law's shape as she hovered on the other side, waiting for me to knock. My hand hadn't even touched the door before she pulled it open, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Don't bother coming in," she snapped. "You're not part of our family." It stung more than I wanted it to. Even though she and I had never really gotten along, this was a new level of hostility. I looked her square in the eye, took a breath, and nodded. Just nodded. Then I turned on my heel, letting my heels click purposefully against the porch floorboards. I didn't say a word. I'd half expected it might happen one day, but I never realized how good it would feel to walk away without stooping to argue. The real shock was that I'd come by that afternoon in search of my husband. Well, soon-to-be ex-husband, if the text message I'd received the evening before meant what I believed it did. It had been simple, curt, and so painfully cliché that it almost made me laugh out loud. "I found someone else. You should move out. We're done." That was it. No heartfelt explanation, no attempt to preserve even an iota of dignity after 7 years together. A text message, as if I were some fling he could casually discard. The irony of what came next still makes me smile. The text message blinked up at me from my phone at around 11 p.m. the previous night. I remember the moment vividly. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, finishing a chapter of a new detective novel while nursing a peppermint tea. We'd had our arguments over the past months. Well, over the past couple of years, to be fair. But to end the marriage like this? A wave of anger threatened to surge, but I learned to keep my emotions on a tight leash. Instead of tossing my phone or hurling curses, I simply tapped the screen to lock it and exhaled. Deep inside, a small part of me felt relief. A sense that I'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Maybe not the method, but certainly the outcome. At dawn, I woke early, showered, and methodically scrolled through the digital notes I kept. It might sound strange, but yes, I'd been prepared. Nothing about my soon-to-be ex-husband's behavior in the last 2 years had escaped my notice. The late nights, the mysterious errands, the sudden interest in cologne, the slip of someone else's hair tie in his car. As he grew more careless, I grew more alert. If I had let the suspicions consume me, I'd have been a wreck. But instead, I put that energy into ensuring that if he ever decided to cut and run, he wouldn't be leaving me high and dry. So when he finally sent that self-righteous text, I didn't collapse into tears on the bathroom floor or call him with accusations. Instead, I placed a quick phone call to my lawyer. Then I wrapped a light coat around my shoulders and headed straight for his mother's place to ask for my boxes. My mother-in-law had appropriated half of our wedding gifts, and I suspected my husband might be couch surfing there as well. Instead, that confrontation stopped dead before it began. The moment I made it to the doorstep, my mother-in-law cut me off. She was the living embodiment of disapproval, standing in the frame with her arms folded across her chest. She said, "Don't bother coming in. You're not part of our family." I nodded once, and I left. If she thought that dismissal would break me, she was sorely mistaken. No teary meltdown, no shouts of, "You'll regret this," because I already knew the next phase of my plan. Their arrogance was going to devour them, and I didn't even have to say a word. 2 years ago, I decided I needed a safety net. My husband and I had never combined finances in a typical sense. We each had separate accounts, and we both contributed to a joint fund for household expenses. After noticing some suspicious charges he tried to hide, I'd started funneling my freelance earnings into a property under an LLC in my name alone. It was a small but strategic investment, a picturesque single-story house in a well-kept neighborhood on the outskirts of town. I bought it under a shell company so that no one could trace it easily back to me. When we needed a place to stay, my husband had lost most of his money in a series of questionable investments, and we were forced to move out of an expensive downtown apartment. He assumed my father had co-signed the mortgage. He believed the LLC was just a friend's real estate venture that graciously agreed to rent to us at a bargain rate. He never suspected I was the landlord, that it was my house. His mother, of course, was equally clueless. After all, in her mind, her son was the center of the universe. Anything that belonged to me either came from him or my family's pity. So there we were, living in my house for nearly 2 years, while he boasted about being the man of the house, throwing fits over the landscaping, the minor repairs, the paint color, and so forth. All the while, the property management company I'd hired, under that same LLC, played the role of neutral landlord, so the rent payments disappeared into a black box he never bothered to investigate. He made excuses about not paying rent some months, claiming tough times. I quietly let it slide, taking mental note of every penny he owed. In addition to owning our home, a reality he was blissfully ignorant of, I prepared a legal nest egg. I had a detailed ledger of all my earnings, investments, and anything of value that belonged to me before the marriage. That ledger showed that I had paid the majority of our bills for quite some time. My husband, in all his arrogance, believed I was simply incompetent with finances. Little did he know I had carefully tracked every transaction, archived every bank statement. Finally, I had a separate savings account with more than enough to cover legal fees. My husband liked to gamble, both literally and metaphorically, but I had methodically learned to hedge my bets. Every time he spent lavishly, I quietly mirrored it with an equal deposit into my own private funds. If he was going to sabotage our shared future, I was determined it wouldn't sabotage mine. Of course, my mother-in-law was in on the theatrics from the beginning. She encouraged my husband's spending, praising him for any show of wealth, no matter how hollow or debt-ridden it might be. She believed my background was middle class, as she'd put it, and hers was above that because of some generations-old family name. It never crossed her mind that all she really had was a house with a big mortgage and a shaky retirement fund. The illusions of grandeur she clung to were crumbling, but she carried herself like a queen. In the weeks leading up to the meltdown, I overheard phone conversations between my husband and his mother. They believed I would never survive without him. They thought I was too meek, too dependent, that I couldn't possibly navigate the world alone. He even told her, loudly enough for me to hear from the next room, that once he divorced me, I'd come crawling back, begging for spare change. When he sent me that text message, "I found someone else. You should move out. We're done." He likely envisioned my tear-streaked face, sobbing into the phone, begging him to change his mind. Instead, I simply made a note to call my lawyer in the morning. In my reply, I told him, "I'll be out by next week. Good luck." I could practically sense him puffing with self-satisfaction. The next day, he invited his new fling, a woman I'd never met but recognized from an Instagram story, over to the house, presumably to measure the windows for new curtains and rearrange the furniture. I made sure to be out most of the day. Let him think he'd won. Let him believe that I was surrendering quietly, tail between my legs. Let him enjoy the delusion that the house was his to rule. Day 1. I began the legal process of evicting them from my property. Yes, they had a tenancy agreement, albeit an odd, informal one, through the property management company, but that didn't matter if rent wasn't paid or if there were breaches of contract. I'd seen to it that all the official paperwork was in place, and I had a few months of unpaid rent as proof of violation. My lawyer assured me it would hold up. Day 2. I quietly packed my most prized possessions and stored them at a friend's place. My husband barely noticed, too busy flaunting his new relationship to pay attention to the half-empty closets. Day 3. My mother-in-law called to see if I'd stop by with some boxes for them. My husband probably told her he was kicking me out, so they needed my help to pack up my own things. Her tone dripped with smugness. She said, "I hope you're not going to make this difficult for us." I only responded with a polite, "Of course not," and hung up. Inside, I felt a wave of satisfaction. The moment was drawing near. Day 4. The property management company delivered an eviction notice to the house. I wish I'd been a fly in the wall when my mother-in-law, who was probably snooping around, found that official-looking envelope taped to the front door. Apparently, she panicked. But rather than calling me, someone she clearly considered irrelevant, she dialed my husband. He was at work, and his boss overheard the conversation as he started shouting something about a mistake and how they must have the wrong house. By that evening, I'd moved out completely. Bags packed, goodbyes said to my beloved garden. I'd left a short note, "Your landlord has evicted you. Best of luck." Day 5. My phone rang incessantly with calls from my husband, which I ignored. Then text after text poured in. "Where are you?" "We got an eviction notice. What did you do?" "Call me. We need to talk." "Why are they evicting us? Did you miss rent?" And then the strangest one from my mother-in-law. "How could you do this to us? You're nothing but trouble. Wait till the landlord finds out you can't pay." I only smiled at that. The next day, I blocked their numbers. Once I was free of them, physically and emotionally, the sense of liberation was astounding. I never realized how tightly I'd been wound, always on edge for the next emotional blow-up or snide remark from his mother. Free from that weight, I found new energy to put into my freelance work, a mix of marketing consultation and brand strategy that I had built from scratch. Within a few weeks, my business exploded with new clients. Word-of-mouth referrals had started pouring in. It turned out that many small businesses appreciated my careful, methodical style. I was thriving, and with the stress of a bad marriage removed, I could focus on truly excelling. My monthly income shot higher than ever. It felt surreal at first, but I'd been preparing for this too. My website was polished, my portfolio on point, and my professional network strong. Meanwhile, as I learned from mutual acquaintances, my husband was learning the hard way that the new fling didn't share his financial fantasies. She expected him to pay for everything, from the fancy dinners to weekend getaways. But with his finances already in tatters from questionable investments and no more free housing, he was hemorrhaging money. He tried to approach me under the guise of making amends, or more accurately, fishing for a bailout. He cornered me in the parking lot of the grocery store one morning. I was just stepping out of my car when he came rushing over, disheveled and anxious. "What do you want?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "Listen," he began, breath ragged. "I need to talk to you. The landlord's demanding we pay back rent. Can you believe they said we owe thousands? Something about not paying for a few months. But it's insane. They're giving me no time to fix this. We're going to be out on the street if we don't come up with the money soon." I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. "Is that so?" He swallowed. The wide-eyed look on his face was almost childlike in its desperation. "You have to help me. My mom's pension barely covers her bills, and this new girl, she's not exactly the supportive type. I know we're not exactly on the best terms, but you can't let us just be homeless. You live there too." I took a moment to consider my response. Then I simply said, "I've already moved on. If you have issues with your landlord, you need to speak with them directly." His face paled. "But—" "I'm sorry," I said, with a level voice that gave no indication of the internal satisfaction I felt. "I really can't help you. Best of luck." His downfall accelerated. My mother-in-law, who never worked a day in her life, marrying wealthy, divorcing, then living off alimony until it dried up, had overextended her credit in the last year. She was banking on her son to support her lifestyle. Fancy teas, garden club luncheons, the works. Without the free roof over her head, she had to sell off family heirlooms and rummage for a smaller place that would accept her questionable credit. She spent weeks furious, embarrassed, and blaming me for the predicament. My husband, now stuck with a girlfriend who only wanted him for the illusions of grandeur, discovered her love dried up the moment the money did. By the time the eviction notice turned into an actual lockout, she had already found a new benefactor. She left him sobbing in his mother's living room, both of them newly homeless. Friends told me how quickly the rumor mill churned. Apparently, they'd borrowed money from neighbors and extended family to cover overdue bills, but even that wasn't enough. And then came the final blow. My mother-in-law discovered the real owner of the house. She was going over the eviction papers, the landlord's name glaring right at her. She asked some hapless clerk at the county recorder's office who was behind the LLC. In that office, she learned that my signature was on the purchase deed, hidden behind the protective cloak of the corporate entity. The next phone call I received from my lawyer was priceless. "She's threatening lawsuits, defamation, everything under the sun," he said, stifling laughter. I told her she had no case, given that everything was filed legally and the back rent is indisputable. When it finally sank in that I was the one who had owned the house all along, I can only imagine the expression that must have twisted across her face. The fury, the indignation, the humiliation. She'd once slammed the door in my face, telling me I wasn't part of her family. Now it turned out that she had been living under my roof, at my mercy. 2 months after the eviction, I was sitting in a tidy new loft apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows and an open layout that felt like the perfect place for my fresh start. My dog snoozed on the rug at my feet. Outside, the late autumn sun painted the city skyline gold. I'd just gotten off a conference call with a potential client, one of my biggest leads yet, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but a glance at the area code hinted it might be from a small town a few hours away, where my mother-in-law had fled in desperation. Curiosity got the better of me, so I answered. "Hello," I said. Silence, then a shuddering breath. "I'm calling on behalf of Harriet," came a timid voice. It was one of my mother-in-law's distant cousins, from what I gathered. "She's not well. She wanted to know if you might be willing to have a conversation. She's in a rough spot, financially." I closed my eyes, feeling a swirl of emotions. There was a time I'd have wanted to spit venom back at Harriet. All the cruel remarks, the cold shoulders, the condescension. She had treated me as worthless, unloved, unworthy of her respect. And now she was sending a messenger to beg for mercy. "Tell her I appreciate the call," I said softly, "but I'm afraid I can't help." I hung up, letting the calm wash over me. It wasn't that I wanted to see anyone in ruin, but I also couldn't fix their mistakes for them, nor would I try. I'd learned that the best revenge was living well, rising above the ashes of the betrayal. A week later, as I was heading out to a lunch meeting, I spotted my ex-husband lingering at the entrance to my new office building. He looked skinnier, stressed, wearing the same jacket from last year with fraying seams. He tried to wave me over, but I pretended not to see him and slipped into the back of a waiting rideshare. My business was thriving, my heart was light, and I no longer harbored the bitterness that once threatened to consume me. I'd found my footing, my freedom. In a way, that simple text, "I found someone else. You should move out. We're done," had been a key to unlocking a future I never realized I'd been so ready for. All the twisted manipulations, the arrogance, the betrayal, it no longer had any power over me. That night, as I curled up on the sofa in my loft, with city lights twinkling beyond the windows, my mind wandered back to the day my mother-in-law had stopped me at her doorstep. She never let me cross that threshold, never let me feel welcomed. In refusing me entry, she never realized that she was the one existing on borrowed space, my space. The irony was almost delicious. Sometimes poetic justice doesn't come wrapped in a neat bow. Sometimes it arrives in the form of your own signature on a deed, or a modest eviction notice that exposes the fragile illusions of those who looked down on you. And sometimes, the sweetest triumph is simply moving on. And I have no doubt Harriet and my ex-husband will continue to spin tales of victimhood. They'll blame me for their misfortunes or claim I tricked them. Let them talk. Their words don't affect me any longer, and they don't stop my next client from signing a contract or keep me from enjoying dinner with friends. In the end, I have everything I need. The satisfaction of self-reliance, the knowledge that I stood my ground and protected my future, and the comforting freedom of a life untangled from their toxicity. That's all the revenge I could ever want, and more fulfilling than any carefully orchestrated gotcha. When betrayal comes crashing through the door, it's tempting to hurl insults and wage war in the name of vengeance. But I learned a more profound truth. Genuine triumph is served best not with a vindictive strike, but with unwavering confidence in yourself and the unshakable peace that follows. And so, as the phone continued to buzz with pleas for money or forgiveness, messages I would not answer, I simply shut it off. I turned up the volume on my favorite music, let my dog curl up beside me, and reminded myself that real power lies in the quiet certainty of one's own worth. The world was wide open, and I intended to explore every possibility it offered.